Alright, so let's see if we can wrap up this scene and get this thing looking good. So let's change our camera view a little bit here. I want to basically grab that back wall there, this window, and a little bit underneath this couch right here. And let's do a test render and see what we have. There we go. It's looking pretty good. Pretty nice and bright. Looks pretty good. Now we are missing some details. For example, there's no shadows underneath this couch here. Really, the lighting accuracy of the global illumination is pretty much horrible right now because we're getting some splotching back here and some light spilling, light leaking all over the place. Just does not look good. So we need to fix this. So this video I'm going to dedicate just to showing you how to manually tweak this stuff. Like if you were a Mental Ray Pro, and at the same time you're going to be able to pick up some techniques and some information that will help you to tweak and troubleshoot your own scenes when working with global illumination, especially when you dig in here with your own hands and do this thing manually. Okay, so this is what it looks like so far. What I'm going to be doing is cloning images here so we can do compare and contrast renders later. So let's go ahead and let's start to increase these settings. Let me open up the render setup window. And make sure that you're in the indirect illumination tab and inside the caustics and global illumination rollout. And we're going to deal with the global illumination settings here. Now, the maximum number of photons per sample, or the global illumination accuracy. Right now it's set to 500. Let's go ahead and let's increase this to 1000. Let's move this over to the side. I'm not going to close it because I'm going to be using that quite a bit. And let's render again. Okay, here we go. Let's move this over so we can compare. And you know what? Since I'm not using the little UI here of the render frame window, what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle it off. There we go. Much better. Okay. So here's the before on the left, and the right is going to be an after. Just for the sake of consistency, from now on I'm going to have the before render on the left and the newest render on the right. Okay. So we can see that the render on the left has some blotching and inaccuracies over here on this top part. A little bit difficult to see, but it's there. And on the right, it appears that we got rid of some of that, but it still doesn't look that great. For example, down here underneath the couch, we're still missing some lighting accuracy. There's no shadows or darkening of this area when there should be. Okay, so we need to fix that. So let's go back to the render setup window. So we increased the accuracy to 1000, and that helped out a little bit, but it just wasn't enough. So what we need to do now is we need to just add more photons. We need to add lots and lots more photons here for this thing to look good. So let me close this previous render. I'll keep the latest render and make a clone of it and move it over here to the left. And I'm going to close the render frame window. And what I'll do is I'll just close the render setup window for now. And I'm going to hit H on the keyboard. And that's going to open up the select from scene window here. And what you want to make sure is by default you should have display all set up here. What you want to do is click on this button over here that says display none. That way you get rid of everything in your list. And just turn on this little light icon here to display lights. And there you go. Now you only display the 4 lights that exist in the scene. The 3 area lights and the sunlight over here. Now we don't want to worry about the sunlight. So let's go ahead and select the first area spotlight here. So we'll just double click it to select it. And then over here in the modify panel we can make some changes. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the GI photons here and we're going to go ahead and increase that from 100,000. Let's go ahead, let's see, what can we do? Let's do 500,000. Okay. And hit H on the keyboard again to bring back that select window. And let's go ahead and select the second light. And we're going to go ahead and give that 500,000 photons. Hit H again. Let's bring up the third light. And let's go ahead and give that 500,000 photons as well. Now let's go ahead and do a test render here, see what we have, and we'll compare it with the previous render to see what the changes were. Okay, so there it is. Here's the new one. Here's the before on the left. You can see that they look pretty similar. The quality hasn't changed too much, except that the new one has a little bit more splotching here. And that's occurring just because we have a lot more photons now. You also notice that underneath the couch, there's a little bit of extra shadowing, a little bit more than before. Not too much, but it's a very subtle amount. So we're getting there. We're getting there Slowly but surely we're getting there. So let's close the previous render. Let's clone the new one and move that one to the left. We'll close the render frame window. It can get a little bit confusing, but just try to keep track of that. In order to try to get rid of some of this new splotching that's been introduced over here, let's go to the render setup window. We'll go to global illumination. We'll change the accuracy here from 1000. Let's increase it to 2000. Okay? And now let's do a new test render and see if we can improve the quality of this. Okay, so here's the new render. You can see that by increasing that accuracy from 1000 to 2000, we got rid of the blotching back here and a little bit on the wall. But we're still not getting those nice shadows down here. It's still not looking too great. So this can be improved by quite an amount. So let's clone the newest image, move it to the left, and let's close the render frame window and see what we can do to increase the quality here further. In order to make this look better, what we're going to need is a lot more photons. If you remember when we first talked about photons in a previous chapter, we had to use millions of photons to get a good result. That's going to be the same case here. It's no different here. So let's go ahead and let's start to add 1,000,000 photons to these lights. So I'm going to go in here, 1 and 6 zeros. Just going to copy that number. I'm going to hit H and go to my other lights. Make sure that these other lights also have 1,000,000 photons. There we go. Alright, now let's go ahead and let's try doing a render like this. So I'll do a test render. Move it over here to the right. So here we go. We got a lot more photons now, and if you look under the couch here, it's a little bit darker than in the previous render. If you look at those two, the new one looks a little bit darker and a little bit more accurate. We're also starting to get more shadowing here underneath the couch there, but it still doesn't look that great. Let's see what we can do to fix this. So let's close the previous render, clone the new one, move the new clone to the left. We'll close the render frame window, and let's go ahead and go to the render setup window here. We'll go to global illumination. Let's go ahead and increase the accuracy here from 2000 to 4000. Okay. Let's close that and let's do a new render. Okay, so it's done, and let's go ahead and place this on the right here. Now you can see that the previous render had some color splotching back here on top of this blind, and over here it pretty much went away, so it looks much better. Also, some of the shadowing information looks a lot nicer too, and a lot of the splotching went away, which looks pretty good. So let's close the previous render. Let's clone the new one, move it over to the left, close this. Now, to make this look really good, we're going to need a lot more photons. And I mean a lot more. So 1,000,000 photons per light means that we have 3 lights in total, which comes out to a grand total of 3,000,000 photons. 3,000,000 photons is just not going to be enough. So we need to increase the amount of photons in this scene. So I'm going to change it from 1,000,000 to 2,000,000 photons per light. That's going to give us a grand total of 246,000,000 photons. Let's go ahead and hit H here and go to our other lights. Make these 2,000,000 as well. Last light. There we go. Okay, now this render is obviously going to take a lot longer than before, but that's okay. Let's just go ahead and do it. Okay, so here's the new one. Took a little bit longer to render. If we look down here at the rendering time on the lower left, it says rendering time 52 seconds. So the rendering time has been steadily increasing and increasing as we've been adding more and more photons. Okay, so here's the previous render on the left here, and here's the new one on the right. There aren't many differences. Any differences are going to be very, very subtle and difficult to catch. Now there's some key points that I want to mention here with global illumination. If we go to the render setup window, we can see that we haven't used the maximum sampling radius parameter yet, and if we did, we can increase the lighting accuracy of the photons. The problem is that if we do that, what's going to happen is we're going to need more photons in this scene. You see, this is a lot more of a complicated scene than what we saw in the previous example of that simple gray room with a little hole in the ceiling. Remember that one? That was a very simple scene. And the problem with that one was that that scene won't really teach you global illumination from a production point of view. When you're using global illumination in a real production setting, you'll end up with a scene like this. Something where it's very complicated, there's lots of crevices and areas underneath a couch, areas that need shadows, lots of colors and textures all over the place. And this actually complicates things and makes it a little bit more difficult to fine-tune and tweak your global illumination settings. So it's very important to understand that first. So there's a few principles here that I want to go over with you and explain to you so that you understand why things work the way that they do. Okay? For example, you notice that there's no shadowing underneath the couch, which doesn't look too good, doesn't look very realistic. Okay? Now what we can do is we could increase the number of photons in our scene to ridiculous amounts, in maybe 20 million photons or something like that. Okay? If you're on a 32-bit machine, chances are mental ray is going to crash if you try to do anything more than 2 million photons per light. Okay? It's going to get very unstable. Alright? And using this maximum sampling radius will increase the lighting accuracy of the global illumination photons, but again, you're going to need lots and lots more photons, and this can actually be counterproductive. So why is that? Well, the reason that is because global illumination is not meant to work by itself. See, you're not meant to use global illumination by itself. You could if you want to. For simple scenes, less complicated scenes, you could get away with it, but for a complex scene, you do not want to depend on global illumination by itself. That's why mental ray comes with a couple of indirect illumination algorithms, final gather and global illumination. In reality, both of these features are designed and meant to work together. That way you can render out faster, easier, and higher quality. Because when you just try to use final gather by itself, or you just try to use global illumination by itself, things just aren't going to come out right. Things are going to render slow, and they're going to render slow with artifacts. As you can see in the scene, we still have some artifacting things. If we look at this couch, the edges of it have this strange kind of black stuff here, kind of dark stuff. Looks like dust or something like that. Looks like it's defective. Kind of looks like the couch's fabric has been worn out and maybe torn up and damaged over the years. Okay, so these kinds of artifacts are being caused by global illumination because we're using global illumination by itself, and it's not meant to be used by itself like this. Not for a complex scene that requires a lot of detail and a lot of special care to lighting. So it's very important to understand that. And the other thing to understand is that if for whatever reason you insist on using global illumination on its own for a complex scene, you're going to be forced to use a lot of photons, millions and millions and millions. And the problem is that when you get to a certain amount of photons, it just becomes so taxing on a system that a 32-bit machine just can't handle it, and you're going to have crashes and errors from mental ray simply because you're working on 32 bits with less memory. So if you're going to use just photons by itself, and you're going to be using 20, 30 million photons, make sure you're using a 64-bit machine. And be prepared to have lots and lots of memory on that machine. Okay? So just keep those points in mind. So this actually looks pretty good though. Just for using global illumination by itself, we actually did a pretty good job. This looks pretty nice. Okay, so I'm going to close that. Alright, so that's going to do it for this project here. I'm going to end this video here, and we're going to start a new chapter next and start talking about final gather.